Welcome to Innovation and Leadership. I'm Jess Larson. On this episode, we get to have my new friend, Jeff Ciachurski. Jeff is a Greenbrier now, and we're going to hear all about that. But previously, he grew a giant wind business and sold that to Brookfield for hundreds of millions of dollars. Before that, he was in traditional energy, grew a business to 1.9 million. He's got other exits in there, but what's interesting is how much of this he's done in the public markets for decades. And so we're going to get a little bit of an education on parts of the public markets and talk a lot about sustainable living and wind and housing and all sorts of fun things. Jeff, thanks for making time for this.
Oh, hey, you're welcome. Glad to be here. Thank you, Jess.
So can you explain to people, let's start with this. Can you explain to people why Greenbrier has a different ticker in Canada and in the US and what the venture exchange is? And for people who didn't grow up in Canada like the two of us,
right.
Give a little bit of education there.
Yeah, sure. So our company's Greenbrier Sustainable Living. It trades on the Toronto Venture Exchange under the symbol GRB, and then it's co-listed on the US OTC market with the symbol GEBRF. So as a Canadian growing up in Vancouver, we had the Toronto Stock Exchange, which is our premier exchange. And then we kind of have our venture exchange called Toronto Venture Exchange. And you really don't know the difference. It's simply the same facility, the same symbol applies and what have you. So it's a great place. Canada, it was a really great place to launch. I was very fortunate to grow up in Vancouver. I obviously grew up in Canada, extremely fortunate. The Toronto Stock Exchange has been a place that has launched numerous venture companies over the last, 50, 60 years. A little better program, I think, than in the U.S., much more regulated from the exchange side. And then as you grow up and you get a bigger audience, people do what's called a listing in the United States, a co-listing. But before you do that, you do what's called a registration statement. So it's a long process, takes about a couple of years. And every material contract that the company's ever had, all the disclosure documents, you file it with the SEC. They're getting way more sophisticated these days. So they check all your social media places to see that what you're saying in your public disclosure documents actually matches what you're saying to the public. And they ask for a reconciliation of that. But yeah, the typical Canadian, let's say, high growth story goes from Toronto over to either the NASDAQ or the NYSE AMAX. That's generally the pathway to move on to. It's simply, it's a numbers game. It's 10 times more people. There's some funds in the US that are very specific. They want to see the listing in the US. Most of them trade in Toronto. We've seen all the big flyers that have been successful, and everybody's got full access to the Toronto Stock Exchange. You can trade it with Scottrade, E-Trade, Interactive Brokers. There's full access by everybody in Europe as well. I mean, Canada, as a kid growing up, all of the television shows that I'd watch in the 60s was all the United States. So all my cultural awakening was on the USA. And then, of course, when you travel to the USA and you meet somebody and you're in Los Angeles and they say, where are you from? And you go, I'm from Vancouver. And they go, oh, that's right next to Quebec. And you go, no, it's not actually. It's about 3,000 miles away. But it's a natural place to go. The population, the opportunities in the United States are obviously vastly greater than Canada. But Canada's a great place to form a business, to incubate it, to get the initial set of investors and kind of prove the business model. So in that way, it's kind of a great proving ground that you can use to expand to the bigger world.
Yeah. So I agree. And it is, I want to talk about this later in the show. It is interesting how onerous it is to be public in the US. And growing up in Western Canada, so many small companies go public, and that's how they get going, and that's how they get access to the capital to exist. And it's not just venture capitalists, they just go public on the venture or something like this, right? I want to talk for a minute, though, about Greenbrier and what the different projects you're doing are.
Yeah, so Greenbrier is really focused on sustainable living, and it's really it was really a coming to terms with, where not only my career has gone, but it's kind of followed and shaped the world. So Canadians, we were always kind of the last ones in the extraction business. Extraction was a big part in the United States, probably 150 years ago, no longer today. Canada really was still that way up to about 30, 40 years ago. And so when I graduated from mining school, I was in the mining industry. It was kind of a choice you had to make, logging or mining. That dominated really most of the country. And as that sort of vanished from other countries competing in the markets, I went from extraction onto renewable energy by meeting individuals that built the first wind farm in the United States, which happened to be in California in 1979. And they became really good friends with myself. And I followed them for a few years. And around 1999, 2000, kind of after I spent 20 years in the mining industry, I started a renewable energy company. And excuse me, just before that, in the extraction industry, I formed a company in the tar sands, which is this big oil deposit that the world knows about. And I had a $1.9 billion exit, not million, $1 billion exit in that company. And it was just an evolution. I thought, the world doesn't need, excavations 20 miles long, 10 miles wide, and a mile deep. And so I then naturally moved over into renewable energy and working with guys that were really the foundation of the entire industry. Started the company in 2002, built wind farms from the ground up in California, Arizona, in Puerto Rico, solar farm. And then that company was bought out by Brookfield Asset Management in 2013. Sorry.
Can we talk about that?
Yeah.
Listeners of the show know about my Innovation Leadership Live series. And obviously you were able to attend the party there at the governor of Hawaii's office.
That was great.
A week and some ago.
Yeah.
And I threw in that extra question, knowing you were in the crowd, about, when I was interviewing the governor in front of everyone, and he was talking about how he'd like more renewables on the island, doing stuff with an island like Puerto Rico and stuff. What was your first thought about, what would have to be overcome for someplace like Hawaii to really get as much wind and solar as they say they'd like?
Yeah, really public support. So tiny island, kind of unlike North Dakota, which could host hundreds of thousands of megawatts with ranchers who are more than delighted to offer their section of land to gain $80,000 a year of extra revenue by hosting 10 big turbines on the property. This would be in great contrast to Hawaii, this tiny, beautiful island. And my God, this awful wind turbine, which you see like on the west side of Maui, you see the north shore of Oahu. I was invited into actually Oahu on a wind project in 2012 that I did not get into, and it became it's just a small project. But the big obstacle, Jess, on your point is, it's a small island. So you have this overbearing 400-foot diameter blade, 1,000 feet from your home. I mean, it's really not that. I love windmills, but at that point, I don't love them. Right? It's a little bit overbearing, to say the least. So public support is obviously the big issue in places like Hawaii and Puerto Rico, at least for wind farms. I know there's solar farms going up. There's a shortage of land. It's a small island, right? It's tiny, and it needs to store that renewable energy. And so now you need batteries. You need huge batteries. So the solutions are being worked out, but still to this day, I think Hawaii, if I get the numbers close, Hawaii and Puerto Rico are still 50% of the generation coming from burning fossil fuels in old steam plants and gas plants. So there's a long way to go, and there's a lot of opportunity in Hawaii still to this day. It just requires a lot of sophistication to meet the needs of clean energy and what the environment wants, and then at the same time meeting the needs of the people who live there that are saying, "Hey, you know what? Let's not do the opposite to what we want in this beautiful place." And tough problems is what I like. And so Puerto Rico is 3 times the population of Hawaii. It's got more opportunity. It's farther behind. I spent 16 years there. You're not just conquering a commercial issue. but you're actually conquering a major environmental issue because again, they're burning bunker oil, which is the dirtiest form of energy generation that there is. Yeah. So, the two islands, Hawaii and Puerto Rico, still offer the biggest financial opportunity in the United States for renewable energy. It's just a very tricky area to work with. A lot of politics, riddled in challenges, let's say. But that's how you do well for your public company, is really solving complex problems.
Yeah. Um, I'm such a Brookfield fan because I'm such a Warren Buffett fan.
Right.
And the way that Bruce Flatt has really taken so many of
Oh
those,
my
like,
God.
you know, Ben Graham, Phil Fisher, Charlie Munger, you know, people who taught Warren Buffett and how Warren Buffett has changed all his things. And then you look at Bruce Flatt at Brookfield, and now, as with their partnership with Oaktree and Howard Marks, who lives those same principles. But I think I respect so much the way Bruce Flatt and Howard Marks have taken those Buffett-esque principles and applied them to different asset classes, with real estate and credit and things like this. So I heard that you started Western Wind with like 250 grand originally.
That's correct.
Does that sound about right? So
Yeah.
you think about, let's just, obviously you'd had the huge $1.9 billion exit already, but now you're starting over. And talk about like a principle for somebody who wants to start a company and they've only got 250 grand to start, and getting it to the point where, some of the world's best asset owners, $1 trillion Brookfield want to give you 400 and something million dollars for a company originally started for 250K. What's a principle that helped you,
Oh my God.
do it all over again and have another big exit?
Well, my God. Sacrifice. I want to bring some humor into this because, I was with you in Hawaii and you had some great people there. I mean, over the top, famous people in the music industry and the business. And one of the key music guys who was phenomenal walked over to me and said, after my presentation, and heard my story, said, when did you know? The first thing he said was, when did you know that you had hypercreative ADHD? And I said, probably since I was little. And then he said, well, it's a great trait to have. And I said, thank you. And I said, are you sure I'm not on the spectrum? And he says, no. And then he went into great technical detail on why I do have hyper active ADHD. And he says, it was very too technical for me to understand. And then he said, by the way, if you're not getting it now, I can send you a book. And I said, look, I've got hypercreative ADHD. I would be able to read the book and finish it. But there is a drive. You have to have a burning drive. The simplest book that was ever published that sold well was the one by Think Rich or Think Grow Rich. I forget the author.
Oh, Napoleon, Think and Grow Rich.
Yeah,
Napoleon Hill.
Yeah, and you're kind of looking, for where the magic sauce is, and it's basically you have to have the burning drive. The drive has to be it has to run eternal. It transcends everything. And then the sacrifice, because to do it properly in a public company, you're not thinking about yourself, you're thinking about everybody else. And the most common trait that people get into when they're really presenting their story and their game and their vision is you get a lot of people interested, and then 99% of people are vulnerable to looking after themselves. And that just simply means, making the road a little easier, and that leads to dilution. And so you cannot have a successful exit unless you're an undiluted company, that the shareholders have such a built-in value because of that there's few shares outstanding. So sacrifice is a huge part of it. I think it's the greatest part of it. It's and again, there's a lot of things you could write a book on it. I'm not in the book writing mode. I don't know if they teach this in in Harvard Business School. But these are traits, I think, more personal traits than something that you can learn from a textbook, in my opinion. Sacrifice, sacrifice. Thinking about everybody else but yourself, right?
and you're solving you have to solve really complex problems that professionals in their individual fields, like the best lawyer in project finance or the best mechanical engineer in the renewable energy industry, does not want to overcome that challenge just because it's too much brain damage. Not because there's an unpassable brick wall. It's just simply you're going those extra miles that nobody else wants to go. So really complex problem solving and then adjusting to everybody, right? So it's not a cocktail party where, you have this one big epiphany and everything works out. It's really a lot of struggles, and you end up having the DNA of a lot of people in your system that you can actually find a pathway.
So, just I have a follow-up question to that. I should have a quick sidetrack in the middle. Your earliest investors in a traditional energy company that grew to 1.9 billion, or in Western Wind, sold it for 400 and something million. What do you think the multiple, like what rate of return do you think your earliest investors got in the end? Like what were the initial shares sold?
Oh, sure. So there's all good answers, and they vary from good to better. So first of all, when you set yourself up in a public company to succeed, you have to realize you're working for the equity shareholder. So you really have to do things for a 25% return. It's not something that how should I say? Well, put it this way: it's obviously it's a subconscious thought, but you can't act like private equity where you want double-digit returns, but you want to act like a lender, right? You are truly fully at full risk. But because of that full risk, 25% is an annual threshold that you have to exceed. So when you start off with a public company, you start off with your ideas and your concepts, at least initially. I mean, this for me has been statistically true, is people make between 10 to 20 times their return just in the first year, because you're telling the story, you're presenting it to people for the first time. The markets are like that. They get very frothy. People like to run ahead of themselves. So, in the initial year or two, people definitely make, a 10 times return, 15 times return on their money. A lot of investors want to stay in for the long term. And they believe a lot in the Warren Buffett philosophy, which is it's not timing of the market, it's time in the market. And it's better to take the investment that you believe in and stick with it. So on that basis, like on a statistical 10-year average, the companies that I've had, at least on asset growth, have been a CAGR of let's say 60% combined asset growth per year, and then on a market growth, on an equity growth, but basically around 25% per year. I think one was like 22% over 11-year. Western Wind was 22% year after year if you invested in day one and you stuck with it till year 11 or year 10. But in that time, you have these meteoric rises that are crazy, right? You have swings in the market.
That's actually the number. That's the number I want to talk about, because for me, I just don't have a lot of faith in speculators who feel so much more like gamblers. Oh, I can guess what everybody else's emotions are going to be a few months from now. I guess from just a ability to sleep at night standpoint, investing in a business that's actually making profits, Warren's mentor, his Columbia business professor, Ben Graham, said that in the short term, the market is a popularity machine, but in the long term, it's a weighing machine. It weighs how much actual equity profits you've produced over time, right? And so you look at that 22, 25%, I mean, those are the kind of numbers that Berkshire Hathaway has done, depending which, how many decades you take or whatever. Those are Warren Buffett-like returns, okay? So I want to go back to the question I was going to ask, which is this. Both on this show and at those high-profile events, whether it's the ones that I throw or the ones I go to, I run into a majority of founders having, hyper creativity, ADD. It gives me some hope for myself, right? And I want to talk about this concept of sitting with lawyers who've been a lawyer for 25 years and are supposedly the expert. And then you, the CEO, have to help them figure out what they haven't figured out on their own. Or, you know, name your profession, the engineer, the whoever it is, right? And it's kind of shocking to me how underrated that creativity expert is. Like being in rooms with world expert technicians and then have somebody who didn't do the degree, doesn't have 2 decades practicing it day in, day out, come up with an answer that the expert didn't. It almost seems like that shouldn't be possible, yet it happens over and over and over. What do you think is going on there? Do you think has something to do with the drive plus the creativity, or how is that even possible? Because it happens all the time.
It does. I mean, there's some very talented people that, who when I say talented, who master the academic side of things at an early age, and then really venture off to business. So they've known it was really a stepping stone. So I take my hat off to that, right? You can't beat, picking up that degree and a professional degree in accounting early in the game. But the key is you have to get out of it fast, right? So all of these disciplines have their cycles and their systems and their protocols. And when you're in it, it's a highly structured environment. It is a narrow box. It's a specialty field in a narrow pathway. Many get discouraged if you look at a big engineering firm, the people that I've worked with, that I've hired, my companies, like the chief engineer of Western Wind, as an example, my wind energy company I sold to Brookfield, he was the chief engineer of a massive utility. He had 450 guys working for him. He told me his day-to-day life was horrible. He was looking after the personal and emotional problems of professional engineers. He was not working on any projects. He was way beyond that. That's sort of the life of a utility engineer that could be very helpful for you in the renewable energy business. They're basically solving people's emotional problems. So the creativity part is really tough. And I think it's just really the way the system is set up. These are smart people, but they're in a structure. They're in a form structure that constricts them, prevents them from thinking a certain way. So a good lawyer, yeah.
As you said that was a little bit of a breakthrough for me, because I think also it has a framing of what people think they're doing. I've had a number of like chief people officers from big, 10,000, 50,000 people companies on, just to see because every CEO gets on here and they talk so much about culture and the people. And so I wanted to like talk to the folks of like these, I had chief people officer on for Walmart US. She has 1.4 million employees under her, right? Okay. And what was interesting at that level, because I'll out myself, I expected a number of like boring HR people. Okay. And I got some, but I also got these people who like, they think about themselves as like second in command or third in command for making this company money. And they just happen to be using HR to do it. And it was different. Like they just approach the world like they're so fundamentally in the business of producing profits, versus others who are fundamentally in the business of getting a high employee engagement score. And that's what they thought their job was. And so they oriented for that and they solved for that. And I think about all the securities lawyers I've hired and engineers, because, we did renewable energy and traditional energy as well, back when I ran my fund in Calgary, and versus those academically inclined folks who stayed in the narrow box, who think their job is primarily to follow the rules or something. It's like their job is to tell us how things are done instead of invent how things are done or something. I don't know if I'm kind of rambling. Is there anything in there that makes sense to you?
Yeah, I mean, and of course, when you mention companies, like a lot of them have cultures, right? That they become cultures of their own, and then they start creating their own set of rules, right? In circumstances, that's contrary to even maybe the engineering principles they went by. You look at Boeing. I mean, I don't know if I'm going to get in trouble, but Boeing was historically a company that prided itself on quality and craftsmanship. And it was one of the few companies where engineers actually ran the show. If you look at Boeing 25 years ago, if you look at its, its list of leaders, you'll see guys, generally master's degrees of, aerospace engineering, and then, an MBA, but they were good at what they did. And that was the culture, right? Was building quality. And then it went through a transformation, right? Where it then became profit. I'm guessing that's what happened. It became profit, right? And the quality.
Short-term profit. Because quality is for long-term profit.
Yeah.
Right? Quality is for long-term profit. Games are for short-term profit.
Yeah. I mean, culture has changed. There was another guy, and this way we can stay out of trouble. There was a guy that was famous in one really big company as a CEO. It's better to talk like that, right? In ambiguity. He was famous in this one company with this one big culture. And he then was hired by another big company in a different field of expertise, a different field of products. And I mean, he completely, it was unbelievable that he would crash, because you would think, oh, wow, he comes from sort of one kingdom, understands all the philosophies of bureaucracies and how they work. And you're talking about these human improvement scores and things like this. So, gee, I can adapt over to this other massive bureaucracy. And it was just completely different set of culture, different set of circumstances, its own little set of boxes and moats and whatever. And he was a failure there. And he was a failure with the people, put it that way. It might have had growth or something like that. It may have been organic. I'm not sure. But he was despised by the people that were there, and they wanted him gone, and he was gone. So it's big things attract, bureaucracies, and they create their own rules, and they create their own gravity and their own inertia, and they start going down a certain track, and they can't get off that track. So the nimbleness of being an entrepreneur, I think you have a lot of fun you had a lot of fun in the sub 500 million stage. Everything's sort of magnified. You probably have a lot of fun in the sub $5 billion stage. I don't want that to be the guiding light. Obviously guys like, Apple have proved differently, and other companies as well. But you need leaders that maintain the entrepreneurial spirit and to constantly challenge the status quo, and always looking at things from a different perspective than the culture that sort of forms around you just by the sheer force of gravity and inertia. So, I mean, that's the best I can answer. I mean, there was a fun show on television, and I never forget this one scene. It was called Junkyard Wars, and it was these guys that were junkyard dogs, just completely illiterate, uneducated guys that were managing a junkyard, and they would assemble these different things, and they would get certain tasks with other people. And one task was there was nuclear engineers from the Royal Navy who worked in the submarine service, right? So they had the rank of lieutenant commander, but all had a degree in nuclear engineering. And they faced off against the junkyard warriors. And the task was, build me an amphibious vehicle, like within 2 hours or something. And so 2 hours later, the junkyard dogs had an old wreck of a Land Rover, and they welded 45-gallon drums airtight around the perimeter of the Land Rover, and then welded on the extension of the drive shaft a propeller, and they drove it into a lake. And the propeller, it floated, and it was amphibious, and when it went on the land, it worked. And 3 hours later, the engineers were arguing over, which way the map was facing north, right? Who had a compass. It was just bizarre. So, I mean, God, I feel blessed, and I think you are too, Jess, to have the creativity and the entrepreneurial spirit. I think it's something that you can train to some degree, but I think things like discipline and passion and sacrifice, I think those are inherent traits that you're born with, that you need to have to build something successful.
Well, and I want to talk about something you brought up, like the mental fortitude to overcome ambiguous, like hard and also ambiguous problems, or problems where it's not just hard, it's also like, it feels like you have to go through the fog, like we're not exactly sure what the answer is. So I want to talk about a principle or thoughts or advice you have for entrepreneurs who they need to both be like raising money, finding customers, and inventing what the business is, which they've pretty much got, but there's like some pretty fuzzy parts they're still figuring out. And they need to be getting investors and clients and doing all three of those things at the same time.
Right.
Well, okay. So I probably, I probably need to go to therapy, right, to figure that to answer that question. It's a left brain, right brain deal. To be creative, highly creative, which is one side of the brain, and I forget which side it is, and I'm not being funny because I don't pay attention to that. And then the other side of
left brain's the creative.
Okay, left brain. And then the right brain. So I have this highly pedantic side, which is very unusual with entrepreneurs. So I can read a 150-page agreement and find the detail, which was kind of a segue to what you said with all these, like, let's say professional lawyers. So there was a deal, it was a power contract. Power purchase agreements they used to be 25 pages in 1980. They're now 250 pages long. I had to go into a meeting to sign the final agreement. This agreement was like 165 pages. I went there an hour early. I had the best project finance lawyer in the United States review the agreement with his legal team. I had my in-house legal counsel, and I had the jurisdictional lawyer, meaning the lawyer from the state that the project was in, review the agreement with his team. So 1 week of review by 3 great legal teams. I come in, I go from page 1 to page 166, 165. And on page 164, there's a clause in there. It's like a sentence long. And if I would have signed it, it would actually destroy the commercial viability of that agreement. And it was an oversight. So of course I felt good to find it. And it kind of, in one way, your ego takes over and it validates you, and you go, oh, that's why I'm the CEO of all these great startups, because when you have to roll your sleeves up, you do it. So having the ability to be very pedantic and be very creative, and having them both operate together, that appears to be a challenge, right? To do that, it's not a normal thing to do. The creators are generally out there, big arm waving, big concepts, they can't execute. And then there's your operational staff or the executors that you need, and they're not the ones that are visionary. So you have to be both. And I think you just have to comfortably live in the zone of uncomfort, meaning I'm constantly wrestling with both sides and dealing with both sides. So I'm executing, and I'm visualizing where I'm going, and I'm pitching the story. So you have a lot of things going at the same time. But the bottom line is you can actually see the end of the road, and you actually execute. And then as years get on, you become more and more confident. You don't become less frustrated because every day is a process, and you take every day. You don't take every day for granted, but it's definitely it is definitely something that is unique to be able to operate on both sides of your spectrum, right? Both the creative side and the very pedantic side, where you can really execute on details and make them happen. So that's what I deal with, and I like being there. I love the uncomfort space. Selling a company, the day that I exited out in both big companies, 1.9 billion, $430 million. It's such an anticlimactic moment. Like, it's just you just feel it feels not that weight's lifted off your shoulder. It's kind of like, oh, did I do this for this? But it's simply that was the measurement of time or the measurement of value that you exited out. And you really do appreciate that it's the journey getting there that makes it exciting. It's nothing greater than getting there that makes it worthwhile. The day of exit is okay. You get the wire transfer comes through, the staff, the company that bought your company, they have people living in a hotel room a block away, and they come over and everybody in the office turns in the keys and they walk away, and the new guys come in. Very anticlimactic. So I don't live for that day. I actually live for building the company day by day, doing the things that we're supposed to be doing, and learning from the experiences. And and the guy told me 10 years ago, he goes, you made 2 major exits in your life. The next thing you got to do now is you got to keep that company and build it into a giant in of itself. And so that's what I'm doing with Greenbrier. Now, I'm always public, so I'm always subject to be bought out. You have to be in that level of awareness, right? That, the right price comes along, shareholders want to sell, they can sell.
but you try to carry the football as far as you can go, because you know that when you're running the show, you're going to be a force multiplier at 25% a year versus where my companies were taken over by majors. Those companies have a historic, like even Brookfield historically is like an 8% yearly return, right? They borrow money all day long at 4 or 5%, and they hope for a double digit, but they end up getting really a high single digit return. And they're great asset allocators, but it's not the machinery that I want to be part of day by day. Even though they offered me a job to run one of their projects and divisions after I sold, I said, no, you know what? I'd rather go on my own and to continue to look for value and opportunity and to change the world. And I never regretted not working with Brookfield or not working with any of the multi-billion-dollar companies that I sold to. So it's definitely a spiritual journey and a journey of passion.
Yeah. Well, thinking about this, multiple billions in shareholder value you've accrued over your career. What's one of your billion-dollar success secrets for either investment fund managers or founders listening today?
Okay, the one secret, again, it's not an epiphany. It's really, you have to find a goal that solves a really big problem. You got to solve a big problem. So in the time of renewable energy, in the time of the oil sands project, it was just simply an energy issue, right? Where conventional oil, the easier deposits were hard to find. And we went into this really generally new technology, it wasn't high level technology, but, it's steaming oil out of deposits that if they were on the surface, they'd look like asphalt, right? That was when you're putting a highway in. So, it became the go-to place in the oil industry for sure. It's now lost its luster because the world understands now that these deposits are like 20 miles long and, miles deep. In the renewable energy industry, it was definitely changing the way the world got energy. And it was based on a spiritual awakening that everything that we need, God has provided around us. So there's definitely a spiritual overtone. And so with renewable energy, right, we have the sunshine, we have wind. Most of the time we have wind. There's some places that don't, but we definitely have sunshine. So everything we need is around us. I mean, you could literally, with the technology we have now, you could build enough solar panels and enough battery storage and enough greenhouses that you could make any city sustainable, both for food, water, everything that you need. I mean, it's factually true. It may not be as cheap as, taking the resources from another country, but it's factually true. So when I got in the renewable energy business, it was solving a big problem, and that was basically burning fossil fuels, right? So an environmental issue, but making renewable energy big enough that the cost base was cheaper than conventional energy. So wind energy and solar energy today is now cheaper than building a coal plant or burning natural gas. And that's a factual truth. The intermittent nature of it was what Bill Gates said in 2000, which would create the world's richest man or person, which would be who could store the intermittent nature of energy. And that became Elon Musk. And he did a fabulous job in that. But then I had to move along from there, and I thought, okay, I got to solve another big world problem. And the world problem is, what are we going to do with 50 million car batteries a year? And what are we going to do on the hydrogen sense? Because if you do electrolyzers and fuel cells, there's not enough platinum in the Bushveld igneous complex in South Africa to provide enough platinum group metals for all the fuel cells and electrolyzers we need. So it led me to the greatest form of renewable energy is energy conservation. And the greatest form of energy conservation is sustainable living, because 68% of the energy we use is actually around our house. It's in our home and around our home. And if we can reduce the consumption of that 68%, we're doing a greater goal than producing more renewable energy. It's not the answer. So sustainable homes, they're small footprints. They have smart meters. They have very well laid out designs, recycled material, solar panel on the roof. And because they're small, they're classy. They're not cheap, but because they're small overall, they're lower cost. So
what happens is when you solve the sustainable living issue, you then solve the affordable housing issue, which is a multi-trillion-dollar problem in the United States. So that became when those ideas meshed together, and then I knew I had a target, a multi-trillion-dollar target. I knew then that I had the pathway, and I could create the pathway to be a solution to that. I could easily fit in. There was, if Brookfield decided to go all in affordable housing, that I could be a major competitor and I could do things that Brookfield could not do because I can operate more nimble and much quicker, and I can find my niche and hopefully build it as much as I can to be a national player. So yeah, along the way, there's always the risk that you get bought out, because that's what happens for a public company. But there's so much opportunity there, and it's not addressed because the national builders talk about sustainability, but they're still building homes that they built in the 1950s, right? They're building 2,500, 3,000 square foot homes. I mean, that's great. A lot of people need it, but unfortunately, only 5.7% of Americans can afford a mortgage at $500,000 a year, meeting that threshold of 28% of their gross income going to housing, right? And so
Yeah, can we talk about the Utah project specifically, since that's close to home for me?
the Utah project, I have a big shareholder in my public company, a very close friend. So him and his father bought a parcel, 1,361 acres in 2002. So it was just simply an off the cuff investment. I think it was like $5.5 million. They along with the land came, I think, 550 acre feet of water. At the time, my partner, my big shareholder, he was not only the largest title and escrow guy in Arizona, he ran the largest private mortgage brokerage in the United States. So he was doing, I think, 350 offices, 7,000 employees, and about $3.5 billion a month in mortgages. So the investment was just an idle investment, right? So he held it in inventory for 22 years. And 5 years ago, he approached me. He said, this would be a great place to build like a community solar thing and whatever. And I said, Utah has a pretty low cost utility, so I don't think there's that much of an economic advantage there. Housing would be the way to go. And then when he watched me in California take a piece of land 20 years ago and go through the entire process the last 5 years, converting that into full approval to build 995 affordable homes. Because if you could do something in California, you could do it anywhere in the world. It's literally the toughest place. He said, "Here's the 1,300 acres. Put it in your public company. I'm a shareholder. You tell me what economic terms you want." So completely, a beautiful human spirit that also believes in giving to other people. And then you take that 1,361 acres and then you do what you want to do. So I grabbed the property, we signed an agreement. And in that property came engineering in 2009, where it was originally permitted for 6,750 homes, roughly, like 7,600 homes. So it was built on the old style, golf course, big homes. And I was with the city of Cedar City on November the 12th, and I was with the city manager, the chief planner, the city engineer, the city lawyer, and they said, "Yeah, this development agreement is still in effect. You still have the approval to build these 6,700 homes." But here we are in the year 2024, and my concern was, I'm going to go to that town, and I want to help them solve a problem that they need help with, not something that I want as a commercial business person. It needs to be commercially viable. In the back corner of my mind, it still has to meet the 25% threshold per year, but I want to ask them what they want. So I came to the city asking them what they want. And what they want is to solve the problem they're having. This beautiful city, Cedar City, is losing people. It's losing young people and elderly people because they can't afford the $550,000 home that a national builder is currently building. There's a lot of people there that have money, but there's a lot of people there that are just simply regular people. They make $80,000, $90,000 a year, and they can't afford $5,000 a month for a mortgage payment or $4,000 a month for a mortgage payment. In addition, Southern Utah University wants to grow from 15,000 students to 30,000 students. So the competition with all of those requirements is a lot of people like myself going to Cedar City for the first time. I've been there many times, by the way, over the last several years, but I'm so enthralled by, number one, the beauty of the city, the people that are there, the lifestyle. I don't know why I get so emotional when I visit a city where people are nice to you. It's kind of like apologizing. I don't want to go into tears here, but I have a place in Scottsdale. I got a place at Newport Beach in Vancouver, but I'm stuck living in like 3 bubbles. But once I leave Newport Beach and go into a county north of me, I don't want to mention any names. I mean, people are just not that helpful to other people. And I'm so in love with Cedar City. So I said to them, what's the issue? What's the issue you're having? And he's going, the issue I'm having is this is the city leaders speaking is we're having great people coming in from out of town. They're super people, and they're bringing in a few $1,000,000 of passive investment. So they have passive income, and they're paying the 550 or 800 for 800,000. You get like this unbelievable home, and it's pricing out all the locals. Okay. So I said, okay, this is obviously the segue for smaller sustainable homes. So the long story short is we're targeting like roughly 1,200 square feet, completely sustainable, low water usage, low electrical usage, instead of stacking them on top. So you're paying now $300,000 for a townhouse because we have 1,361 acres that we bought at a legacy price. We can give them an 8,000 square foot lot or 1 acre, but on a very small, affordable, but high end, right? So just because it's 1,000 square feet doesn't mean it's trashy, but we can sell it for $300,000 to $350,000, and we can get that mortgage cost down to $2,000 if they have to 100% finance. So we're simply cutting the prices in half, giving them more quality per square foot, but actually lowering their cost to live. The city loves it. We're going to be filing plans on the first phase, and Utah, gave us the Utah story. They said, hey, you know what? We're not that other state. So when you file something and you spend the time, we're not going to hold you up through 4 years of bureaucracy because, some bureaucrat in another region of the state feels that, that he doesn't want to give you the permit, because that's what they do in some states is they make more money by not allowing projects to go through than by actually satisfying the problem. So that's another issue in my business model is you try to work with people who are gonna do well by allowing something very positive to happen versus people who are going to make money by saying, no, all the solutions that you bring, right? And there's no greater piece of information than California raising us spending $23 billion in fiscal 2023 on the affordable housing crisis and actually not building one house for that $23 billion. It's absolutely mind-boggling where the $23 billion went. Like, I have no idea. And of course, the Auditor General for California, that person doesn't know where the money went as well. So you have to really work in areas. One of the secret sauce, you asked me the secret sauce for people watching, you got to work at geopolitical subdivisions where the governing leaders actually want to solve real-time problems. And they want things to happen. And so that's one of the secret sauces as well. So,
I love that so much. Obviously, Cedar City's got Brian Head Ski Resort, and I like you grew up in Western Canada and then moved to Southern California. I started off in LA and then ended up down in Orange County as well, next to you over in Huntington Beach instead, and then San Clemente. And my wife and I, we'd gone back to Calgary for a while to run a fund, and then came out here to Utah. And I remember going to stores, and the clerk is like, "Can I help you?" But they really meant it. And you're like, "No, I know how to shop. Give me some space." They're so friendly. And I'd visited here. I had cousins here and friends here. But moving here was these people are absurdly friendly. So friendly. And so I've gotten so used to it that when I go to New York and other places, I love things about New York. But you do miss the people looking out for each other at the level that they do out here. It's so my friend, who's been a supporter of our charity Child Rescue Association for 15 years, recently retired as he made his way up quite a ways up in LAPD, and they moved to Cedar City for all the reasons that you're saying. That that's their retirement home, is to go out there, and it's a pretty magnetic place.
It is. It's so unique. I'm very grateful to be able to work there and build there, and I love Utah. Like I'm in love with the state of Utah. So yeah, I live in a bubble. I'm in Scottsdale, I'm in Vancouver, I'm in Newport Beach. I mean, they're bubbles, right? And I'm so grateful I'm here. And I just really feel so bad, right? I feel that I wish that you could buy a home for $300,000, a family, and live in a great neighborhood, right? And to live in Newport, you got to spend $4.5 million now to get the same feeling that you get in Cedar City, and it's completely unjustified. So instead of another thing is, solving social issues. I think affordable housing is a social issue. If you put people in great communities at a low price, and again, there's no magic in the numbers, at a low price in a great community, in the full definition of both, that's solving a big social problem. You're not forcing them to go to a big metro area where they have to spend 4 hours a day of rush hour, including both ways, to going back and forth to work. Like, how can you help your family and be part of your child's engagement, or your friend's engagement, or your loved one's engagement, whatever your family situation is? How can you be part of that if 4 hours a day is spent on an interstate highway? It's like completely bizarre. It's very painful to watch the country suffer through that. So all I can do is again, when you're talking about what could I tell somebody else watching this? You really want to solve a big problem. You want to be a force multiplier, and you want to solve it. And so the only way you can deal with it is dealing with it in a very practical way, and that's what I'm doing. So I hope I didn't give away all my secrets, but it's again, it's you got to it's all about your blessings. I'm so fortunate that a guy bought land in Cedar City in 2002, 22 years ago. That's a massive blessing. The situation in Tehachapi, the same thing. When I bought the land, and the reasons I bought it, is a blessing. So this huge thing is all about, is all about about what God's done for us, and then carrying that mission forward. And I feel that public companies, to me, is the best way to express that mission, is doing things for other people. If I did them for myself personally, I would have a much greater fortune, but I'd rather be doing it for everybody else. I'd rather own 5% of a public company and have 4,000, 5,000, 12,000 other people benefit than doing something for myself. I just don't think that way, and I can't operate that way. So that's sort of a part of my character, who I am.
It does bring up a question I've got, because, I've spent, I don't know, 25 years pretending to be an adult so far. Right. And it's all been in private companies.
Yeah.
And, a criticism which sometimes is very rightly levied is that the public markets incentivize people for short-term thinking instead of long-term thinking.
Right.
And yet, there are those great public companies. I mean, look at Amazon. Everything in their filings was like preparing people. Hey, this is for long-term investors. We do not expect to turn a profit. We do not, is pushing people thinking long-term. Like you said, you run everything planning on a 25% per year IRR,
right,
over the long term, not just what can we get next quarter.
right.
What's your advice to founders, CEOs who do decide to go public, of how to resist the intense pressure for making this quarter at the expense of the long-term profits for a business? Like that balancing, like we do need short-term results. The stock market demands it from us,
Right.
but we can't let that distract us from the long-term vision here.
Yeah.
How can they balance that?
Well, you just have to ignore it. You have to ignore the background noise. So in Greenbrier, I have 98% of the shareholders, including the big family offices, are long-term players. So they understand what I'm up to. But you'll get occasionally a big shareholder, not often, but you'll get a lot of small. You'll get 2%. So out of say 4,000 public shareholders that I have, you'll have 70 or 80 shareholders that will nag and whine. There's two issues. One is
there's two issues in dealing with it. You're public, so they can sell and get lost. I don't tell them to do that, but they're free to do that. So that is another great thing about being public. And the other thing is you just have to ignore it. I mean, and I have examples where one investor I made $11 million for on a previous deal, public deal, and the person hates me. They actually made 11 million. But they bought it because they knew it was a good trading opportunity. But they don't care anymore because they run a big fund and they trade multiple things. And when you ask them for a favor or whatever or thing, they're not responsive. They don't really care. So, yeah, there's a lot of ungrateful people in the world. There's people that have different business plans and their own different missions. So you just can't give up your own values. And when you're doing those quarterly calls, again, it's just not the pressure you want. I mean, there's so many people that are in the analyst game and they're, what are you going to do? What are you going to project now? What am I going to do this? What am I going to do that? The best thing to do is say, this is what my plans are. Just keep your guidance for the next quarter low, because it's simply a safer way to get there. And ignore the background noise. Talk to the CEO, actually talk to the senior officers of the company. Don't communicate to the company through the financial markets or through the financial statements, because when you're doing a startup like myself, so right now I have land and the entitlement for 5,500, well, actually, to be technical, Cedar City is fully entitled at 6,700 homes, and Ciachurski is 995, so 7,700 homes. So I have several $billion of value there. But because the land I bought in Ciachurski was a $20 million land investment that somebody screwed up 20 odd years ago, and I bought it for $1 million because the city was freaked out that potentially I was going to bring unwanted people in from Los Angeles County until they realized what kind of person I was. I can't show that value on the financial statements for more than $1 million, right? So U.S. GAAP or IFRS, the rest of the world uses IFRS, right? International Finance Reporting Standards. Both of those accounting doctrines don't allow anything more than the book value. So I have a nominal book value on the balance sheet, and then I don't dilute my public company. So I've got $12 million of payables, but there 11 million is to myself and directors who loan the company money at low interest rates, because we'd rather do that than doing a public offering and diluting the shareholders. So we're willing to put our own money on the line to deliver the goods and take that value back from the project, rather taking it from diluting the shareholders. And so with Greenbrier, right now you're coming to me at the very end before I break ground on 3 projects, but yet I have 35 million shares outstanding. I mean, I should have over 200 million shares outstanding. So it's all this sacrifice, right? And I never promoted the company. This is the second podcast I've been on. I've been on one podcast last week. And so now the objective is to regularly work together with yourself and other podcasters and let them know what we're doing as a company. So now they can follow and understand, and I can educate the world as what an entrepreneur is doing, the methods of getting there. And I can really build trust, and I can empower people, right, with knowledge of what it takes, by giving them value and giving them education and giving them really empowerment to make those decisions based on information that they could not gain anywhere. And then so finally through all of that, then you get trust. And then somebody goes, you know what? I think I might follow this Jeff Ciachurski guy in this public company. It sounds really interesting. And let's have that dialogue and let's find out what's going on. So that's what you have to do. You have to really roll up your sleeves, is what investors need to do, and talk to the entrepreneurs themselves. Just get in their head, ask your concerns, because you're not going to find it on the financial statements. Those days are gone, right? Like 40 years ago, you'd go to the library and you'd pull the financials on, let's say, Chevron Oil, and you'd go, oh, I found something in the financials nobody else did because I went there the day that it was released. Well, those days are gone, right? Whatever you find in the financials is long known before the financials are even released. You really have to talk to management, especially in these companies that are startups, and understand what's really going on. Let me conclude, going to your point about going to bed every night. Because I'm a land-based company, I go to bed every night
waking up in the morning extremely comfortable, because guess what? I own 7,700 building lots that you can't take that away from me. The value goes up every day. So I'm not taking money and putting it drilling for oil. I'm not doing a phase 1 clinical study where 10 years from now, I got to do a phase 3 clinical study. And along the 10 years, something can happen. The money's gone. Everything I do is building up the value of the assets. They're not showing in the financial statements. That's the key. So you have to roll up your sleeves, talk to management, understand what's going on. And I do have documents by third parties that are big firms that talk about the values of the projects, but you can't put them on the financial statements because it's against accounting rules. So anyway, I'm beating the story over and over again. Talk to management, find out what's going on, and you can learn a lot from that. So I apologize.
Yeah.
I apologize for the long answer.
No, people who listen to this show a lot know that like pretty much everything I hear can be related either to Warren Buffett or special ops.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
And everybody talks a lot about Ben Graham, who influenced
Sure.
Warren Buffett so much.
Sure.
And what doesn't get talked about near as much is Phil Fisher and Charlie Munger.
Okay.
And really, Warren talks about how like the first half of his career was much more Ben Graham. And like you said, reading those reports from the library, endlessly and trying to spot the opportunity as you described it, that where the financial statements show that somebody just missed this. But he really talks about how the second half of his career was much more Phil Fisher.
Right.
If anybody interested, his book, Common Stocks, Uncommon Profits, really describes exactly what you just said, which is that he feels like investors would be much better off spending a huge amount of time getting to know a company intimately, talking to management, and really understanding everything about it, and then having a more concentrated portfolio, which obviously
Right.
did so well for Warren and Charlie for all those decades.
Right.
It is interesting, this idea of how much hard thinking keeps people from doing things that the smartest people have done. Where it's like a lot of work, where it's like, well, does everybody say NVIDIA is going to keep going up or not? Instead of like doing their own research and doing their own work, right?
Right.
And back to Howard Marks, he says, your only opportunity to make an above average return is to have an information edge, right? Because you either understand the industry better, you understand the business better, you understand the whatever, which, as you said, is already been traded on if it's in the financial statements, high frequency traders have already traded on it by the time you're seeing it. Where that opportunity to really learn a business, really learn management, really learn, is this the type of jurisdiction? Like you said, is it a big problem in a place where people actually want help with the problem and their policies and laws indicate that, right? Anyways, I feel like it's been a great masterclass here. Again, tell people the website and the ticker symbols and the,
Sure.
Is LinkedIn the best place to connect with you, or where do they go from here?
Yeah. So go to my personal email address, westernwind, all one word, at shaw, shaw.ca, westernwind at shaw.ca. The website, www.greenbrierliving.com. And we trade on the Toronto Venture Exchange, symbol GRB. And we trade on the US OTC, symbol GEBRF. The liquidity on the Toronto Venture Exchange is much higher. It very rarely trades on the US OTC, but anybody in the world of the United States can get access to the Toronto Venture Exchange, all the online brokers and everything. GRB on the Toronto Venture Exchange. So yeah, just give me a ring. Call me at my direct cell line, 949-903-5906. I'll take your call anytime. I mean, I'll definitely reply by the end of the day. And I do that. And that's very uncommon for director. I've 4,000 shareholders. So whether you own 4 million shares or you own 5,000 shares, I take the call, I do the answer, and I'll do a follow-up email if you need clarity on anything. And I'll send you documents that the company has that's on the public files. That, again, it's not on the financial statement, but they're actually public files. So thank you so much, Jess, for having me here. I really appreciate that. Very grateful.
Yeah. You know, what that reminds me of is I had Eric Wan on the show before COVID, before Zoom had conquered the world, you know? And, everybody can see the billions of dollars Zoom made now. But when I had him on the show, he had 140,000 customers that he'd grown to 140,000 customers with zero advertising, just with obsessive customer service. And when people try to quit Zoom, like very often he was emailing them personally saying like, oh, I'm the CEO. I'm so sorry we're losing you. And they'd be like, yeah, funny. This is a bot. He's like, no, well, let's hop on a Zoom. I want to talk. And he would like save a lot of customers personally because like how shocking the CEO of the company will, has 140,000 users and it'll take time to talk to you personally. And that like going above and beyond made it so I wasn't shocked when he won COVID because I'd never met somebody so willing to go the extra mile. And there's a point where that breaks and you can't do that forever. But like he did things that don't scale. And as a result, he got results that other people didn't get.
Yeah. You have to make yourself available and, and just make yourself available and be transparent and just offer yourself. I'm doing it for a bigger cause. Right. And I love doing that. I'm not doing it for myself. Believe it or not, for me, there's easier ways to make money. And that's, yeah. So, but it's great. I love it. I love what it's about and changing things. And, yeah, thank you so much, Jess. I really appreciate it, the time. And, just follow my company, please. And watch us do great things. And we'll knock it out of the park. I always have. I always will.
I love it. That's a mic drop. And with multiple billions in exits to back up that statement, it holds more water. So I love it.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks for doing this, Jeff. And everybody tune in for our next episode. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Jess.
Bye, everyone.